Title: The Echoes of Seriphus. The sky was painted in shades of violet and crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the vast plains of Seriphus. The air was thick with the scent of earth and salt, the distant sound of waves crashing against jagged cliffs echoing in the silence. Elias stood at the edge of the cliff, staring out at the endless expanse of water. The wind tugged at his dark cloak, whipping it around his legs, but he barely noticed. His mind was far away, lost in the thoughts that had haunted him for months. The city of Seriphus lay behind him, sprawling along the coast with its towering spires and glittering lights. But it wasn't the city that occupied his thoughts. It was the whisper, the one that had begun in the dead of night, calling to him with an urgency he could not ignore. The whispers spoke of something ancient, something hidden beneath the city's foundations. They spoke of the seraphim, a race of beings who had disappeared centuries ago, leaving behind only stories and legends. It was said that they had controlled the very fabric of reality, bending the laws of nature to their will. And it was said that they had left a secret, buried deep in the earth, that would change the world forever. Elias had heard the stories. He had dismissed them as fairy tales, nothing more than the ramblings of old men with too much time on their hands. But the whispers had not stopped. Night after night, they had called to him, growing louder, more insistent, until he could no longer ignore them. And now, standing at the edge of the world, he knew he could not turn back. "Are you ready, Elias?" The voice came from behind him, soft and unyielding, a woman's voice that Elias knew all too well. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting those of the woman who had stood by him through every trial, every test. Amara. Her face was framed by dark hair, her expression unreadable as always. But there was something in her eyes, something that mirrored his own uncertainty, his own fear. She had never once asked for this, never once questioned his decisions. Yet here she was, standing beside him, ready to face whatever awaited them. "I'm not sure I am," Elias admitted, his voice low. "But I have to be. We don't have a choice anymore." Amara stepped closer, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him in a way nothing else could. "We've made it this far, Elias. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." He nodded, though the doubt still lingered in his chest. He had never been a man of destiny, never been the kind of person who sought out great adventures. But the whispers had chosen him, had chosen both of them. The path ahead was unknown, fraught with danger, and yet he couldn't help but feel that they were on the brink of something monumental. "We should go," Elias said, his voice steadying as he turned back to the distant city. "The answer is down there, beneath the city. I can feel it." Amara didn't hesitate. She moved to his side, and together, they began their descent toward the city's heart. The wind tugged at their cloaks, but they didn't look back. There was no turning back now. The streets of Seriphus were bustling with activity as Elias and Amara walked through the crowded market square. The city was a blend of old and new. Ancient stone buildings stood side by side with towering glass structures, creating a patchwork of time itself. The hum of conversation, the clinking of metal, and the distant sound of music filled the air, but Elias barely noticed. His mind was focused on the task ahead. The whispers had been leading him here, to the underbelly of the city, where the secrets of the seraphim were said to lie hidden. But as they ventured deeper into the city, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. It was as if the very air around them was charged with anticipation. "I don't like this," Amara muttered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd. "Something's off." "I know," Elias replied, his eyes scanning the crowd. "But we have no choice. We have to find the gate. It's the only way." They navigated through narrow streets, their steps quickening as the atmosphere grew thicker, the weight of the city pressing in on them. Finally, they reached an old stone building at the end of a forgotten alley. The door was weathered and covered in ivy, as if it had been untouched for centuries. The air around it hummed, a low vibration that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. "This is it," he said, his voice tinged with awe and fear. "The gate." Amara stepped forward, her hand brushing against the door. "Are you sure about this?" Elias hesitated for a moment. The whispers had led him here, but the silence was deafening now. There was no turning back. "I have to be." With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The inside was nothing like what he had expected. The stone walls were covered in intricate carvings, glowing faintly with an ethereal light. The air smelled of old dust and ancient magic. And at the far end of the room, a pedestal stood, a single crystal resting atop it, glowing with a pulsating energy that seemed to resonate with Elias's very soul. "That's it," Amara breathed, her eyes wide. "The Seraphim's secret." Elias stepped forward, his hand outstretched toward the crystal. As his fingers brushed against it, a wave of energy surged through him, and a vision exploded in his mind, a flood of images, voices, and sensations. The Seraphim, their power, their downfall, and the terrible price they had paid for wielding such strength. The crystal shattered, and the room was plunged into darkness. And then, the whispers stopped. The Echoes of Seraphis, Part 2. The darkness was suffocating. It wrapped around Elias and Amara, pulling them deeper into a space that felt like the very essence of nothingness. The air was thick with the energy that had surged from the crystal, its force still reverberating through the room. Elias could feel it humming beneath his skin, the magic pulsing like a heartbeat, wild and unpredictable. It felt as though the very foundation of the world had shifted, like something old and powerful had awakened. "Elias!" Amara's voice came through the blackness, sharp with urgency. "What happened?" He reached out blindly, his hand brushing against the cool stone wall as his eyes tried to adjust. But the darkness was impenetrable. There were no stars, no light to guide them. He felt the weight of the silence pressing in, suffocating in its intensity. "I don't know," he said, his voice thick with uncertainty. "But something has changed." A sudden spark of light flickered in the distance, dim, like the dying embers of a long-forgotten fire. The two of them moved toward it, their steps quickening, as though something were pulling them forward. The air seemed to shift as they walked, the oppressive weight beginning to lighten, and in the distance, they saw the faint outline of a doorway, an archway etched with glowing symbols. As they neared the archway, the light grew brighter, flickering like a candle in the wind. It was at once both beautiful and terrifying, casting long shadows across the walls that seemed to writhe and shift as if alive. Elias stopped just before the threshold, his eyes scanning the room beyond. It was a chamber, vast and ancient, its walls lined with shelves filled with forgotten tomes and relics of long-forgotten times. But what caught his attention was the figure standing in the center of the room. A woman. She was tall, her form draped in a flowing gown of shimmering silver that seemed to ripple with an inner light. Her face was obscured by a veil, but her eyes glowed with an otherworldly radiance, piercing through the darkness and into Elias's very soul. "Who are you?" Elias asked, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. The woman's lips parted in a smile, though it was not a reassuring one. "I am the keeper," she said, her voice like the wind whispering through ancient trees. "I have waited for you." Amara stepped closer to Elias, her hand resting on his arm. "The keeper? What is this place?" "The heart of the Seraphim," the woman replied, her gaze never leaving Elias. "This is where their power was born, and where it was sealed away. You have awakened it." Elias's pulse quickened. "What power? What is this place?" The keeper stepped forward, her eyes glinting with a knowing that sent a chill down Elias's spine. The Seraphim were not gods, as many believed. They were something more, something ancient. They harnessed the power to bend the fabric of reality itself. Time, space, thought. They could shape the world with a thought. But in their arrogance, they reached too far, and the cost was too great. They sealed away their power to prevent the world from tearing itself apart. "But we can't just leave it here," Elias said, stepping forward. "The city, the world, everything's been shaped by this power. We have to understand it, control it." The keeper's eyes softened, her smile fading into something more sorrowful. "You cannot control it, Elias. You are not meant to. No one is. The power of the seraphim is a force of creation and destruction. You've already begun to awaken it, and now you must decide whether you will wield it or destroy it. That is the burden you have inherited. Elias felt the weight of her words sink into him. I don't want this power. I didn't ask for it. The keeper nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing. None of us ever asked for it. But the power chooses, Elias. And once it chooses, it doesn't let go. You can no longer walk away from it. Amara stepped forward, her voice steady but full of concern. Then what do we do? What are we supposed to do now? You must face the consequences of your awakening, the keeper said, her voice growing softer, almost pitying. The seraphim's power was locked away for a reason. Now that it has been freed, it will not rest until it finds its true heir, the one who will wield it. Elias clenched his fists, the weight of her words settling in his chest like a stone. But I'm not the heir. I'm not like them. I'm nothing like them. The keeper smiled faintly. You may not have chosen this, but it chose you. You carry their blood, Elias. You are the last of their line. The air in the room seemed to shift, the energy thickening. The faint glow from the symbols along the walls intensified, and suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The power is waking, the keeper warned, her voice urgent. And it will consume everything if you do not act quickly. Elias's head spun. The weight of her words hit him like a wave, knocking the breath from his chest. He was no longer just a man. He was part of something far older, far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. What am I supposed to do? He asked, his voice raw. The keeper's gaze softened. You must go to the Heartstone. The seraphim sealed their power there, and it is the only place where the power can be controlled or destroyed. But beware, Elias. The path to the Heartstone is treacherous, and once you step onto that path, there is no turning back. Without another word, the keeper turned and walked toward the farthest wall, where a massive door loomed, covered in intricate glowing runes. Elias felt a chill sweep through the room. The keeper's words echoed in his mind. He had awakened something far beyond his control, and now he had no choice but to face the truth of what the seraphim had left behind. Amara took his hand, her grip firm, offering him a quiet strength he hadn't realized he needed. We'll do this together, she said quietly. Elias nodded, his resolve hardening. The weight of his bloodline, of his destiny, pressed down on him, but it was a weight he could no longer ignore. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and the unknown, but he couldn't turn back. The fate of the world depended on what he did next. Together, they stepped toward the door, ready to face the power of the seraphim, and whatever consequences awaited them on the other side. The Echoes of Seraphis, Part 3. The air around Elias and Amara felt charged as they approached the massive door, the symbols carved into its surface glowing with an otherworldly energy. Each step they took seemed to intensify the hum in the air, the door's presence pressing down on them, as if it were alive and aware of their arrival. The keeper's words echoed in Elias's mind, the power is waking, and it will consume everything if you do not act quickly. He clenched his fists. He didn't know how to wield the power of the seraphim, but the weight of it, the weight of destiny, was inescapable. The whispers had been right. He had already awoken something that would not rest until it had found its true heir. The door loomed ahead of them, tall and imposing, its intricate carvings depicting celestial patterns, celestial beings, and visions of ancient battles. The images seemed to shift and move, as if the very history of the seraphim was etched into the door's surface. There were two ornate handles, shaped like coiled serpents, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling glow. Are you ready for this? Amara's voice broke through Elias's thoughts, her tone quiet but laced with uncertainty. He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the turmoil inside. He wasn't sure if he was ready. The path ahead seemed unclear, and the power that awaited them felt overwhelming. But there was no choice anymore. I don't think anyone's ready for this, Elias said, his voice low but resolute. But we have no other choice. If we don't do this, everything will fall apart. Amara nodded, her expression softening for a moment, before her gaze sharpened once again. Then we face it together. With that, Elias reached out and grasped one of the serpent handles, feeling a jolt of energy pass through his fingertips as he touched it. The door groaned as if alive, the sound echoing through the chamber. He and Amara shared one last glance before he pulled open the door. Beyond it was a long corridor, lit by faint, glowing blue lights embedded in the walls. The air here was colder, heavier, as if the very essence of the place was thick with ancient magic. The further they walked, the more Elias felt the weight of the Seraphim's presence pressing against him. The power was alive, he could feel it thrumming beneath his skin, trying to connect with him, to claim him as its true heir. As they reached the end of the corridor, the floor opened up into a vast chamber. At its center, suspended above an ancient stone pedestal, was the Heartstone, a massive crystal, glowing with a pulsating, eerie light. It was beautiful and terrifying, radiating an immense energy that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. Elias's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The source of everything. The power of the Seraphim, waiting for him to claim it, or destroy it. Do you feel that? Amara whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. It's like nothing I've ever felt before. Elias nodded, swallowing hard. His body was trembling, not from the cold, but from the sheer force of the energy in the room. He could feel it, the pull, the weight of what was being offered to him. But was he strong enough to control it? Was anyone? The moment he stepped forward, the Heartstone seemed to respond, its glow intensifying, filling the chamber with blinding light. The air hummed with power, and Elias felt it push against him, like it was testing him, probing for weakness. Suddenly, the Keeper's voice echoed in his mind, the Heartstone is the key. It holds the power to reshape everything, to bring back what was lost, or destroy it all. Elias. Amara's voice was strained, filled with worry. What do we do? The crystal seemed to call to him, its energy surging like a living thing. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the whispers in his mind growing louder, their words unintelligible but urgent. He couldn't fight it much longer. He knew what he had to do, but did he have the strength to control it? You know what you must do, the Keeper's voice echoed again, this time louder, more insistent. You are the one who has awoken it. You are the last of the Seraphim. The power will not rest until it has chosen you. I didn't choose this, Elias muttered to himself, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He didn't want this power. He didn't want the responsibility. But in this moment, he realized that he had no other choice. The chamber seemed to pulse around him, the Heartstone calling to him, its light growing brighter. It was time. He stepped forward. As his hand touched the Heartstone, a shockwave of energy surged through him, blinding light engulfing him, and for a moment, he thought he might lose himself entirely. He felt the ancient power of the Seraphim surge through his veins, flooding his body with an overwhelming force. His mind was filled with visions of the past, of the Seraphim, of their downfall, their arrogance, and their sacrifice. Their power had come at a terrible cost, and now, Elias understood what it meant to carry that weight. He gasped for air, his body trembling as he fought to control the power coursing through him. It was too much for any one person to bear. But he couldn't stop now. He couldn't let the fog of the Seraphim's past swallow the world again. He had to be the one to end it. Elias! Amara shouted, her voice barely audible over the overwhelming surge of power. She was running toward him, her face full of fear. You have to fight it. Don't let it take you. The crystal's light blazed around him, and the ground beneath his feet trembled, the chamber shaking with the force of the Heartstone's power. He couldn't hold on much longer. He could feel it, the fog, closing in, trying to claim him, to make him its heir. In that moment, Elias understood the truth. The Seraphim had sealed away their power not because they feared what they could do, but because they feared what they would become. They feared the corruption of such immense strength. But Elias was not the Seraphim. He wasn't bound by their mistakes. He fought back against the power, the surge of energy pulling against him like a living beast, and in his mind, he heard one final whisper, "The choice is yours, Elias." He closed his eyes, gathering every ounce of strength he had left. His hand tightened around the heartstone, and with a final, desperate cry, he released the power. There was a moment of perfect stillness, and then everything broke. The aftermath. When Elias opened his eyes, the world was silent. The blinding light of the heartstone had faded, leaving only the faint, fading glow of its once mighty energy. The chamber was still, the air heavy with the absence of the power that had surged through it. He was on his knees, his body weak and trembling, but the weight that had crushed his chest was gone. The whispers had stopped. The power of the seraphim was no longer within him. He had severed the connection, broken the cycle. Amara stood beside him, her face pale with worry, but when she saw the look in his eyes, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. "It's over," Elias whispered, his voice hoarse. "The power, it's gone." She helped him to his feet, and together, they looked around the chamber. The heartstone had cracked, its once immense glow now dim and fading, as if the power had been drawn into the earth itself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They had come so far, faced so many trials, but now, standing in the silence, Elias could feel the enormity of what they had done. The world was still. And for the first time, the echoes of Seraphis, epilogue. The days following the destruction of the heartstone were filled with an eerie quiet, a stillness that hung in the air as if the world itself had paused to breathe. The power of the seraphim, once so overwhelming, was gone. The energy that had threatened to consume Elias, Amara, and the city of Seraphis had vanished, leaving behind a strange peace that neither of them had expected. Elias stood on the balcony of the now silent chamber, overlooking the city. The skyline of Seraphis, once a bustling metropolis of towering spires and glittering lights, now seemed muted, more grounded, as if the very fabric of the city had shifted. The stars above shone brighter, as if the sky itself had been freed from the influence of the ancient power that had once cast its shadow across the land. Amara joined him, her presence a steady comfort in the quiet. The cool night air wrapped around them, and for a moment, they simply stood together, taking in the world they had saved, and the price they had paid to do so. "Do you think it's truly over?" Elias asked quietly, his gaze still fixed on the distant horizon. He didn't expect an answer, but the question had been on his mind ever since they had destroyed the heartstone. Could it really be finished? Could the seraphim's power truly be gone for good? Amara sighed softly, the weight of everything they had endured settling over her. "I don't know. I'd like to think so. But I think that's a question we'll have to live with." The seraphim's legacy was too powerful to vanish without a trace. And though the heartstone is gone, there's always the chance that something, someone, could try to take its place. Elias glanced over at her, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "And we'd stop them." Amara's eyes met his, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Together, as we always have." The city stretched below them, the lights twinkling like stars on the ground. Despite the quiet, the city was still alive. People moved through the streets, businesses began to reopen, and life carried on as it always had. The cycle had been broken, but the world didn't stop spinning. It never did. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had chosen differently? Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara was silent for a moment, considering the question. The choice had been theirs, and though they had destroyed the heartstone and severed the seraphim's power, they both understood that it had come with consequences. The world had been changed. The future was uncertain. "I don't know," she said finally, "but I think we made the right choice. I don't regret it, Elias. I couldn't have lived with the thought of what could have happened if we hadn't acted." Elias nodded, though a small part of him wondered if the right choice had truly been made. The weight of the seraphim's power, even after its destruction, still lingered. Could they truly have sealed it away forever? Could it truly be gone, or was it only lying dormant, waiting for someone else to awaken it? But for now, He had to let go of those questions. They had done what they could. They had freed the world from the fog of the Seraphim's past, and now they had to let the future unfold on its own. The silence between them stretched comfortably. They didn't need to speak anymore. They had both come to terms with the truth. The world had been changed, but there was still hope, and in the end, that was enough. Years later, the world had moved on, as it always did. Time passed, and though the memory of the Seraphim and the Heartstone faded into myth, the impact of their actions remained. Elias and Amara continued their journey, though their paths were different now. They had both taken on new roles. Elias, now a leader in the rebuilt city of Seraphis, working to ensure that the legacy of the Seraphim would never rise again. Amara, a scholar and historian, studying the ancient civilizations that had come before the Seraphim, ensuring that their history was remembered, but that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. They still spoke often, still shared moments of quiet understanding. But their journeys had taken them to different places now. Elias leading the city into a new era, Amara searching for forgotten truths buried deep in the earth. One evening, after many years, they met once again on the balcony of the same chamber in Seraphis. The city had changed, grown, and prospered, but there was still a peace that hung in the air. The sky was just as it had been that night long ago, 1,000 stars stretching out above them. The world was still alive, still moving forward. And, for once, Elias knew that the future was theirs to shape. The burden of the Seraphim's legacy was no longer their own. The cycle had been broken. Together, they had changed the world. And now, it was their time to live in the peace they had earned. Title: The Veil of Arcanes. The wind swept across the barren desert, stirring the grains of sand into swirling patterns as it howled through the canyon walls. It was late afternoon, and the sky above was painted in a deep orange, the fading sunlight casting long, sharp shadows across the jagged landscape. Far in the distance, a storm loomed, dark clouds swirling ominously, a tempest that threatened to swallow everything in its path. But within the quiet, desolate expanse of Arcanes, a land thought to be forgotten by time, the storm would not touch the land for hours. Here, the silence was as much a part of the desert as the winds or the sand itself. And it was in this silence that Kalen stood, eyes fixed on the horizon, his hands wrapped tightly around the hilt of his sword. The weight of it, a weapon forged in the flames of a lost era, was familiar, comforting even, though it carried with it a legacy that Kalen was struggling to understand. The sun was dipping lower now, and the temperature was dropping. He knew he had little time before the cold would set in, and his thoughts wandered back to the task at hand. It had been years since he had set foot in Arcanes, and the desert had not forgotten him. But he was not alone. In the distance, barely visible against the horizon, a figure appeared. It moved slowly, a dark silhouette against the fading sky. The figure was tall, its outline shrouded in a tattered cloak, the hem kicking up in the wind. Kalen's grip on his sword tightened, but he didn't move. The figure stopped some distance away, just at the edge of the canyon. And then, a voice, low, raspy, but undeniably familiar, called out to him. Kalen. It was a name that should have meant nothing to him, but it stirred something deep inside him, like a long-forgotten memory. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the sand. I told you to stay away. The figure lifted its hood, revealing a face he knew all too well, a face that had haunted his dreams and nightmares alike. Mara, Kalen said, his voice strained. What are you doing here? Mara's eyes, dark, unreadable, met his, and for a moment, there was only silence between them, the wind swirling around them like the world itself was holding its breath. I came for you, she said softly, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. You can't run forever, Kalen. He took another step toward her, his expression hardening. I'm not running, he said, his voice low and determined. I've been to the edge of the world. I've seen what lies beyond the veil. This is where it ends. Mara shook her head, a sad smile curling at the edges of her lips. You think it ends here? You think you can escape your past, Kalen? The Veil of Arcanes is not just a place. It's a choice, and you're not free of it. Not yet. The mention of the veil made his chest tighten. He had been a part of that dark legacy, one that had cost him everything he once held dear. The Veil of Arcanes wasn't just a legend, it was a power, a force, and it was tied to him, to his bloodline. It had always been tied to him. Why now? He demanded, his voice a mix of frustration and fear. Why after all these years? Mara's gaze softened, and she stepped closer, the wind tugging at her cloak. Because the veil is thinning. And it's calling you, Kaelin. You can feel it, can't you? It's the only reason you came back. Kaelin didn't answer at first. He had returned to Arcanes after years of wandering, of searching for answers that he never found. He had always known there was something waiting for him here, something that had been buried deep in the heart of the desert, just as Mara had once warned him. But the veil, he had hoped that he could leave it behind, let it fade into memory. But it wasn't gone. It was never gone. You were right, he said finally, his voice quiet but full of resolve. I came back because it never stopped calling to me. I don't know what it wants. I don't know how to break the cycle. Mara nodded, as though she had been waiting for him to say those words. Then you're ready. Kaelin looked at her, disbelief flickering in his gaze. Ready for what? For what's to come, she replied, her voice carrying an edge of finality. The veil isn't just a power, Kaelin. It's a doorway, a path between worlds. But it's weakening, and when it shatters completely, the world you know will collapse with it. A heavy silence settled between them, and Kaelin's thoughts raced. He had always feared the veil, had always been warned about its dangers. He had thought it was sealed away long ago, lost to time and memory. But Mara's words, and the power that hummed beneath the desert, told him otherwise. The veil is tearing apart, he said, more to himself than to her. That's why I'm here. To fix it. No, Mara replied, her voice sharp. Not to fix it. To control it. She stepped forward, her eyes never leaving his, and Kaelin could feel the weight of her words. The veil has always been in your blood. You have the power to seal it, to bind it. But only you can do it. No one else. Kaelin's pulse quickened as he processed her words. Could he really control the veil? Could he harness its power and prevent the collapse of the world? The thought terrified him. The cost of such power was unimaginable. Why me? He whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. Why is it me? Mara's face softened, a flicker of something that might have been pity in her eyes. Because you are the last of the Seraphians, and the veil is yours to command. The Veil of Arcanes, Part 2. Kaelin stood motionless, the weight of Mara's words sinking deep into him. The last of the Seraphians. He had heard stories of his ancestors, of their extraordinary abilities, their ancient power that could bend the very laws of nature. But he had always dismissed it as myth, legends told to scare children or entertain the curious. Yet here he was, standing at the heart of the desert, facing the truth. The veil was real. It had never truly been sealed. And he was connected to it, bound by blood to a power far greater than anything he had ever known. You said the veil is weakening, he said, his voice hoarse, almost uncertain. How do we stop it? Mara's gaze darkened. We don't. At least, not the way you think. The veil cannot be fixed. It has always existed to keep the balance between the worlds. But as time has passed, the boundaries between them have thinned. The barrier is crumbling. And when it falls completely... She trailed off, and the weight of her words hung in the air. Kaelin swallowed hard. The world will collapse, he finished for her. Everything will fall apart. Exactly, Mara replied, her voice soft but resolute. The veil holds back forces that have no place in this world. The boundaries are weakening, and creatures, entities, things that exist beyond the veil are trying to cross over. Once it shatters, there will be nothing stopping them. Kaelin felt a chill run through his veins. And I'm supposed to control this? He looked down at his hands as if expecting to see something that marked him as different, something that would show him the power he was supposed to wield. But nothing. He was still the same man who had wandered the world, searching for answers that now felt too vast, too dangerous. You've already felt it, Mara said, taking a step toward him. The power is inside you. It always has been. Your bloodline carries the legacy of the Seraphians, the last of their kind. But you're not just their heir. You're the key. Elias's stomach twisted. The key to what? To sealing the veil, Mara said. But not just sealing it. To restoring balance. The power within you can mend the rift between the worlds. But it must be done in the heart of Arcanes. At the temple of the first flame. The name sent a jolt through Kalen, the memories of ancient texts and hushed warnings flooding back to him. The temple of the first flame. It was said to be the birthplace of the Seraphim, a place of unimaginable power, hidden deep within the desert. Legend spoke of it in whispers, saying that only the pure of heart and mind could ever hope to find it. But no one had succeeded in centuries. It was a place that even the bravest warriors feared. Where is it? Kalen asked, his voice tense. Mara nodded towards the horizon, where the sun had nearly disappeared. There, she said, pointing to a mountain range in the distance, its peaks shadowed by the darkening sky. That's where you'll find it. But the journey will not be easy. The desert has changed, Kalen. The paths are lost. And you're not the only one looking for the temple. He felt his heart beat faster. Not the only one. Mara stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. The veil attracts those who would use its power for their own ends. There are others searching for the temple too. Others who believe they can control what should never be controlled. They will stop at nothing to harness the veil's magic. Kalen turned his gaze toward the mountains. The vast expanse of the desert stretched endlessly before him, and he knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with danger. But he had no choice. The world was at risk, and the power of the Seraphim had fallen to him. Whether he wanted it or not, it was now his responsibility to carry it. I can't do this alone, he said, turning back to Mara. I need your help. Mara met his eyes, her expression unchanging, though her hand briefly brushed against his arm, a silent gesture of solidarity. You won't be alone. I'll guide you. Together, we'll face whatever lies ahead. Elias nodded, drawing in a deep breath. He didn't know if he was ready for this, if anyone could ever truly be ready for something so monumental. But he understood now that the choices they made in the coming days would not just affect their lives, but the fate of the entire world. With one last glance at the desert, the vast emptiness that stretched before him, Kalen turned and began to walk toward the mountains, the weight of his destiny heavier with each step. The journey was long, the desert unforgiving. The days passed slowly, the heat of the sun scorching their skin during the day, and the frigid cold of the desert nights cutting through their bones. Mara was a steady presence by his side, her sharp instincts and knowledge of the land invaluable. But even she was not immune to the fatigue and danger of the journey. They encountered nothing but sand and rock for the first few days. The silence of the desert was oppressive, broken only by the howling winds. At night, the stars above them shone brightly, but Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His dreams were plagued by strange visions of dark figures in the distance, just beyond the edges of his sight, always lurking, always waiting. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, they made camp in a small hollow beneath a rocky outcrop. Kalen sat near the fire, his gaze fixed on the flames as they flickered and crackled. Mara was sharpening her blade, her movements precise and practiced. What happens if we fail? Kalen asked, breaking the silence between them. Mara didn't look up from her work, but her voice was steady. We can't fail. Not now. I know, Kalen replied, his gaze never leaving the fire. But if we do, what happens to the world? To Arcanes? Mara's expression softened as she finished sharpening her sword. She set it aside and met his eyes. If the veil falls completely, it will tear apart the very fabric of reality. The worlds will collide, our world with whatever exists beyond. And if the wrong people get control of that power, she didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Kalen nodded, understanding the gravity of their mission. The power of the Seraphim was not something to be taken lightly. They were about to face forces far beyond their control. "You're not alone, Kalen," Mara repeated, her voice gentle but firm. "We'll make it." He offered a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. The weight of his bloodline was a constant pressure on his chest. But with Mara by his side, he felt like there was at least a sliver of hope. The journey would be perilous, the path unknown, but they had no choice. The Veil of Arcanes had to be sealed, or the world would never be the same. The Veil of Arcanes, Part 3. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast sea of sand and rock that seemed to go on forever. The sun had set hours ago, and the night was cold, the air dry and sharp as it cut through their clothing. Kalen sat beside the fire, his eyes half closed, exhaustion gnawing at his limbs. Mara was still awake, her sharp gaze scanning the dark horizon, her hand never far from the hilt of her sword. The desert was a deceptive place. During the day, it was a furnace, oppressive in its heat, but at night, it became a place of absolute silence and cold. The wind had died down, and the world seemed to hold its breath. In the stillness, Kalen could almost hear his own heartbeat, a reminder that they were alone in this vast wilderness, with only the echoes of their footsteps in the sand. The journey to the Temple of the First Flame was taking longer than he had anticipated. The map Mara had provided was more a series of cryptic symbols than a clear path, and the landmarks they had been relying on were becoming increasingly harder to find. Even Mara, with all her knowledge of the desert, was starting to grow uneasy. They were being watched. That feeling of being followed, of something lurking just out of sight, had grown stronger in the past few days. Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted, and it wasn't just by the desert itself. No, something darker, something that wasn't part of the natural world, was out there. He could feel it. Something had stirred with the awakening of the veil. Mara broke the silence, her voice low and steady. "We're not alone." Kalen looked up sharply, his instincts on edge. "You feel it too." She nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon once more. "They're close." "Who?" he asked, standing up and grabbing his sword. His body tensed, every nerve alert. "What do you mean, they?" "I've been tracking the signs," Mara explained, her voice calm despite the tension. "There are traces, shadows in the desert winds, footprints that shouldn't exist. It's not just the desert, someone, or something, is following us." Kalen's grip tightened on his sword. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Mara replied. She crouched beside the fire and began packing their things with careful, deliberate movements. "We need to move before they find us. The longer we stay here, the greater the risk." The cold chill of dread settled deeper in Kalen's chest. Mara was not one to speak of danger lightly. She was a woman of few words, and when she spoke, it meant something serious. His eyes scanned the desert again, but the darkness revealed nothing. The wind began to stir, a low howl in the distance that carried with it a strange unease. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice low, steadying his breath. Mara stood up, already collecting her gear. "We keep moving. We follow the path. They may be waiting for us to hesitate, to make a mistake. We can't afford that." As she finished gathering their belongings, she slung her pack over her shoulder. "We'll head toward the cliffs to the south. There's a hidden pass through the mountains that should take us closer to the temple. It's a longer route, but it's safer. If they're following us, we'll leave fewer tracks there." "Agreed," Kalen said, tightening his sword belt. "Let's go." They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the sand beneath them, their eyes darting constantly over the barren landscape. The stars above seemed distant, their light dimmed by the darkening sky. As they walked, Kalen's thoughts lingered on the growing sense of urgency. Mara had been right. Something was following them, something they could neither outrun nor avoid. He had no idea what they were up against, but whatever it was, he knew it had something to do with the veil and the ancient power that had awakened within him. Hours passed, and they moved further into the desert. The wind began to pick up again, kicking sand into their faces. But as they neared the mountain range, the sense of being watched grew stronger. The hairs on the back of Kalen's neck prickled, and his grip on his sword tightened. "Stop!" Mara suddenly hissed, holding up a hand. She had stopped in her tracks, her eyes scanning the distance. Kalen froze beside her, instinctively drawing his sword. "What is it?" Mara motioned for him to follow her as she crouched low to the ground, her sharp gaze fixed on a ridge in the distance. "They're here." Kalen squinted through the darkness, trying to see what she had noticed. At first, the ridge appeared empty, the rocks dark and still against the sand. But then he saw them, shadows moving, subtle shapes that blended seamlessly with the rocky terrain. There were figures, silent, almost ghostly, their movements too precise to be natural. "They're not human," Mara said quietly, her voice tinged with caution. Kalen's pulse quickened. He had seen such beings in the old stories, dark figures that lived between worlds, moving in the places where the veil was thin. They were the ones who sought the power, the ones who would stop at nothing to control it. But there was something different about them now. They weren't just lurking. They were waiting. Mara drew her sword, her body tensed like a coiled spring. "We need to get to the pass. Now." Kalen nodded, his breath shallow as he scanned the landscape. There was no turning back now. The creatures, whatever they were already here, and they were too close for comfort. The wind picked up again, swirling sand around them, but he didn't wait. He motioned for Mara to follow him, and they began moving toward the rocky pass she had mentioned. But the shadows weren't far behind. As they moved forward, a low, chilling laugh echoed through the wind, a sound that sent a cold shiver down Kalen's spine. "They know we're here," Mara whispered. "We can't outrun them. We'll have to fight." Kalen turned to her, his face hardening. "Then we fight." The laughter grew louder, closer. They weren't just hunting them, they were playing with them, toying with their every move. And they wouldn't stop until they had them. The Veil of Arcanes, Part 4. The eerie laughter echoed through the desert like a chilling wind, wrapping around Kalen and Mara as they hastened toward the rocky pass. The shadows behind them, dark figures that moved with unnatural grace, seemed to be closing in, their movements faster than anything human. They weren't just following anymore. They were hunting. Kalen's grip on his sword tightened, his knuckles white. Every instinct in him screamed to turn and fight, but Mara's warning echoed in his mind. "We can't outrun them. We'll have to fight." He glanced at Mara, her face set in determination, her sword gleaming faintly in the moonlight. She was ready to face whatever came next. They both knew this was a battle they couldn't avoid. "Stay close," Mara whispered, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "We make our stand at the pass. It's narrow, more difficult for them to surround us." Kalen nodded, his breath steadying as he focused on the path ahead. They were close to the pass now, the jagged rocks of the mountain looming above them. It was their only chance, their only hope of escaping this pursuit. But the shadows were growing nearer. They could feel the weight of their presence, an almost tangible pressure pressing in from all sides. The air around them seemed to thicken, as though the very desert was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Then, without warning, the first of the shadowed figures lunged from the darkness, its form blurred by the swirling sand. It was fast, impossibly fast. It moved with the precision of something that was no longer bound by the rules of the physical world. Kalen reacted instinctively, his sword flashing through the air. The figure dodged with an unnatural fluidity, and its eyes, glowing an eerie yellow, locked onto him, gleaming with malevolent intelligence. "Stay behind me," Mara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Kalen barely had time to register her words before another shadow appeared, this one from behind. A cold, sharp blade flashed in the darkness. Kalen spun just in time, deflecting the strike with his sword. The impact sent a jolt of pain through his arm, but he gritted his teeth and held his ground. The first shadow struck again, and this time, Kalen was ready. He blocked its blow, the force of the strike reverberating through him, but he managed to twist his body and push the creature back. His eyes flickered toward Mara, who was engaged in a battle of her own. She moved with the precision of someone who had faced countless enemies, her sword flashing as she cut through the dark figures with deadly efficiency. But there were more of them. Too many. Kalen's breath quickened as he realized the scope of the danger they were in. They couldn't fight forever. He needed a plan, something to give them an advantage. "Mara!" he shouted, parrying another strike. "The pass. We need to get through it, now." She nodded without hesitation, her eyes narrowing in determination. She met the advancing shadow with a strike that sent it reeling, and in that brief moment, they both sprinted toward the narrow opening in the rock, where the pass awaited them. The shadows were relentless. They surged forward, their speed matching the pulse of the desert itself, as if the very earth were alive with their presence. Mara and Kalen reached the pass, and as they did, the first of the dark figures closed in. Mara swung her sword wide, knocking one figure back, but there were more behind it, pushing through the narrow gap in the rocks. The opening was too small to accommodate them all at once, and yet, they were pushing forward with supernatural force. Kalen turned to Mara, his expression grim. "We can't hold them off for long." Mara glanced back at the oncoming wave of shadows, then looked toward the darkened sky above. She lowered her sword, a flicker of realization crossing her face. "We don't have to hold them off. We just need to slow them down." Kalen didn't have time to question her. He followed her as she moved quickly to the base of the cliffs, where jagged rocks jutted out like teeth. "What are you?" Before he could finish his sentence, Mara's sword cleaved through the stone, and the sound of grinding rock echoed in the air. She kicked at a section of the cliff face, and with a loud crack, a huge boulder shifted, rolling down toward the narrow pass. "Get ready!" she shouted. Kalen didn't hesitate. He grabbed a large piece of rock and wedged it into the path, creating an additional barrier that would slow the creatures down. But even as the boulder rolled into place, Kalen could feel the air growing colder, the tension building. The shadows were close. Too close. The first of the dark figures emerged, its form twisting through the sand with unnatural speed, but the boulder blocked its path. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, inhuman sound that made Kalen's blood run cold. And then, something worse happened. The shadow shifted, its form distorting, melting into the sand like it was part of the earth itself. Another figure emerged from the ground, and another. They were no longer limited by physical form, slipping in and out of the sand, as if the very desert itself were their ally. "Mara, they're coming through the sand," Kalen shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Move!" Mara barked. "We have to reach the temple. We can't stop them here." With a final glance at the closing shadows, Kalen and Mara began to run, the wind howling in their ears as they moved deeper into the pass. The creatures had slowed, but they weren't gone. They were still behind them, and Kalen could feel their presence like a dark cloud hanging over him. As they neared the end of the pass, the first hints of the temple's silhouette appeared in the distance. The structure loomed ahead, ancient and towering against the darkened sky. The temple had been built with the same dark stone as the cliffs themselves, its architecture strange and otherworldly. It was a place of power, Kalen knew that now. But it was also a place of danger. They could hear the creatures behind them again, their whispers growing louder, their presence nearly tangible in the air. Kalen's heart raced, his legs burning as they sprinted toward the temple. The entrance was just ahead, an archway made of smooth black stone, covered in intricate symbols. "Almost there," Mara shouted, her breath coming in quick gasps. The shadows surged forward, and Kalen felt the air thicken, the space around them growing impossibly heavy. The creatures were nearly upon them. With a final push, Kalen and Mara reached the archway, and just as they stepped through the threshold, the ground shook beneath them. A final shadow emerged from the desert, larger, darker, its form unlike anything Kalen had seen before. It was a creature of pure darkness, its eyes glowing like embers in the night. Kalen reached for the sword at his side, preparing to face the creature. But Mara held him back. "Not yet," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to activate the seal." "What?" Kalen asked, confused. She pointed to the center of the temple, where an altar stood, covered in strange markings. "The seal of the seraphim. Only that can stop them." The creature roared, shaking the ground, but as it moved closer, a brilliant light flared from the altar. The symbols on the floor around them began to glow, a shimmering energy rising up, a barrier forming between the temple's entrance and the shadows. "We don't have much time," Mara said urgently, running toward the altar. The Veil of Arcanes, Part 5. The air inside the temple was thick with the power of the ancient seal, the light from the altar pulsing and growing brighter with each passing second. It was like nothing Kalen had ever felt before, raw, ancient energy surging through the very fabric of the world. The ground beneath his feet vibrated with the intensity of it, and the shadows pressing at the temple's entrance seemed to recoil, as if the light itself burned them. But the creatures outside, the dark beings, weren't retreating. They were only waiting for the seal to break, waiting for the light to falter. They were relentless, insatiable, and Kalen knew they would not stop until they had what they came for. The power of the veil. Mara's hands were steady as she placed them on the altar, her eyes closed, her lips moving in a chant that Kalen couldn't understand. She had said the seal was the only thing that could keep the creatures from entering, but the way the light pulsed, the way the ground shook beneath them, told him that it was struggling to hold them back. "How long will it hold?" Kalen asked, his voice strained, his gaze darting toward the temple entrance. Mara didn't open her eyes, but her voice was calm, filled with certainty despite the chaos outside. "Long enough for you to do what needs to be done. You have to activate the final part of the seal, Kalen. The blood of the Seraphians, your blood, is the key." Kalen's heart skipped a beat. "My blood? What do you mean?" She opened her eyes, and Kalen saw the depth of urgency in them. The Seraphians were bound to the veil for a reason, Kalen. Their power is what sustains it. But they were also the gatekeepers. You are the last of them. Your bloodline is the final piece, the link that keeps the veil from collapsing. The seal cannot be fully activated without you. Kalen stepped back, his mind racing. His blood, his ancestry, the power he had never wanted. He had always hoped it would remain buried, a relic of a time long past. But now, with the world on the brink of collapse, it seemed there was no escaping it. The power was his to wield, and the cost of that power was greater than anything he had imagined. "You have to do this," Mara urged, her voice firm as she lifted her hand from the altar. "It's the only way to stop them." Kalen felt the weight of her words press against his chest. The choice was his. He didn't know if he was strong enough, but he knew that if he didn't act, the world would be lost. The creatures, the shadows from beyond the veil, would invade, and the balance would be shattered. He took a step forward, approaching the altar. The symbols carved into the stone glowed with an eerie light, and in the center of the altar, a small crystal, the heart of the seraphim's power, sat, pulsing with energy. It called to him, like a magnetic force pulling him closer. The power surged through him, and he felt his blood burn with an intensity he had never known. "This is your destiny, Kalen," Mara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Embrace it." Without another word, he pressed his hand to the crystal. A flash of blinding light exploded from the altar, and Kalen gasped as a torrent of energy surged through him, his body convulsing with the force of it. His blood burned with the power of the seraphim, his mind flooded with visions of the past, the rise of the seraphim, their fall, the sealing of the veil, and the ancient forces that sought to break free. In that moment, Kalen understood. The seraphim had made the ultimate sacrifice. They had bound themselves to the veil to protect the world, to hold back the forces that lurked beyond. Their blood had become the key, and now it was his turn to face the consequences. With a final, desperate cry, Kalen channeled all of the seraphim's power into the crystal, and the ground beneath them shook violently. The light from the altar flared, flooding the temple with an overwhelming brilliance. The dark shadows at the entrance screamed in agony, their forms writhing and twisting as the light pushed them back. But even as the power surged within him, Kalen felt the strain, the cost. His mind threatened to shatter beneath the weight of the energy he was channeling. His body screamed in protest, every muscle, every nerve, alight with pain. "Kalen!" Mara shouted, her voice desperate as she reached for him. "You have to hold on." He clenched his teeth, his hand still pressing against the crystal. The shadows were almost gone, but he could feel them, feel their resistance, their hatred, clawing at the edges of his consciousness. They would not stop. They would not rest. "Almost there," he gritted out, his voice hoarse as the power surged through him, fighting against the pull of the darkness. The light from the crystal reached its peak, and in one final, explosive burst, the shadows screamed one last time, their forms disintegrating into nothingness. The temple was bathed in light, and then, as quickly as it had come, the power began to fade. The stone altar, the glowing symbols on the walls, all of it began to dim. Kalen collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. The pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced. His body felt as though it had been torn apart and remade. He looked down at his hands, his blood, the power of the seraphim still thrumming faintly within him. But it was quieter now. The veil between the worlds was intact. The creatures were gone. Mara knelt beside him, her face pale but filled with relief. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Kalen nodded weakly, his body trembling. "It's over," he whispered, though part of him wasn't sure if it was. The power was still inside him, a part of him, but it was no longer the all-consuming force it had been. It was under his control now, or at least, he hoped it was. Mara helped him to his feet, her eyes scanning the temple. "For now, it's over," she said quietly. "But we can't forget what we've done. The veil is still a part of you, Kalen. And there will always be those who seek to exploit that power." Kalen looked around the temple, the silence pressing in on them. The shadows were gone. The temple was still. But he knew Mara was right. The balance had been restored, for now. But the forces of the veil were far from gone, and the journey was not over. "We'll be ready," he said, his voice steadying with resolve. "We have to be." Mara gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Together." As they turned to leave the temple, Kalen glanced back one last time, knowing that the battle for the future was far from over. The veil of Arcanes had been sealed for now, but the price of that seal had been steep, and the echoes of the past would continue to haunt him, as they always would. Title: The Shattered Crown. The wind swept through the ruins of what was once a grand city. Towers that had once touched the sky now lay crumbled, their jagged remains jutting out of the earth like the broken teeth of some ancient beast. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant echo of falling stones as they shifted under the weight of time. No one had set foot in the city for centuries. It had been abandoned after the fall of the kingdom of Asdaria, its once proud people scattered to the four winds. But even in its broken state, the city still held its secrets, secrets that would soon be uncovered, whether the world was ready for them or not. Elira stood at the edge of the ruined city, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. She had never been to Asdaria before, but she knew its history well. The city had been the heart of the greatest empire the world had ever known, a place of power, knowledge, and prosperity. Until the shattering. The shattering, the great calamity that had torn Asdaria apart, that had left it in ruins. It was an event spoken of only in hushed tones, a cataclysm that had wiped out entire generations, leaving only a few scattered survivors. No one knew the full story of what had happened, and that was how it was meant to stay. But Elira wasn't here for the stories. She wasn't here to learn about the past. She was here to find the crown. It was an artifact of legend, said to have once been worn by the rulers of Asdaria, a symbol of the kingdom's power. It was said to hold untold power, the ability to reshape the world itself. And Alira was certain that it was here, buried in the heart of the ruins, waiting to be found. The crown had been lost in the shattering, its location unknown to all but the ancient texts. But Alira had found clues, pieces of the puzzle that led her here. To Asdaria, to the city that had once been the cradle of civilization, now reduced to nothing more than a memory. The wind howled again, carrying with it the scent of something different, something darker. Alira's hand tightened around the sword hilt as she felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. She wasn't alone. The ground beneath her shifted, and the stone beneath her feet groaned as if alive. A low rumble vibrated through the earth, and from the shadow of the crumbling towers, a figure emerged. It was cloaked in tattered robes, its face hidden by a hood. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though it had been waiting for her. "You seek the crown," the figure said, its voice soft but carrying an unmistakable authority. Alira didn't flinch. She had expected this. The ruins of Asdaria weren't empty. There were always watchers, those who had survived the shattering and still held allegiance to the old ways. But there was something in this figure's voice that sent a cold shiver down her spine. "Who are you?" Alira asked, her voice steady, her hand never leaving the sword. The figure's laugh was a soft, haunting sound. "I am the one who remains. The last of Asdaria's true bloodline. The one who was meant to inherit the crown. But fate does not always favor the worthy." Alira's heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary survivor. This was someone who had lived through the fall, someone who had been here when the shattering took place. "Why are you here?" she asked, her grip tightening. The figure tilted its head. "Why are you here?" it asked in return. "Do you think you can simply walk into Asdaria and take what does not belong to you?" "I've come for the crown," Alira said, her voice firm. "It belongs to no one. It belongs to the world. I'll use it to rebuild what was lost." The figure's eyes flashed beneath the hood, an intensity there that almost made Alira hesitate. "The crown does not rebuild," it said, its tone now a warning. "The crown destroys. You would be wise to turn back before the city does to you what it has done to so many before." Alira felt a knot form in her stomach. She had heard the rumors, the warnings, the stories of those who had come to Asdaria seeking its power. None had returned. But she had no choice. She had come too far. The world was teetering on the brink of war, and the crown was the key to the balance. "I'll take my chances," she said, determination hardening her voice. The figure seemed to consider her for a long moment, then, with a sigh, it stepped aside, allowing her to pass. "Then you are ready to face the truth of Asdaria," it said, its voice tinged with sorrow. "You are ready to learn why the crown was lost in the first place." Alira didn't answer. She moved past the figure, her eyes focused on the ruins ahead. The city was waiting, its broken spires reaching up like the fingers of a dead god. And somewhere in its heart lay the crown, waiting for someone foolish enough to claim it. As Alira ventured deeper into the ruins, the air grew colder. The streets, once grand, now twisted with decay. Broken statues lay half buried in the sand, their faces twisted in eternal expressions of agony. The remnants of old temples loomed in the distance, their columns broken and crumbled. But the closer she got to the heart of the city, the more the ground seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. The crown was near. She could feel it, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the ruins. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and Alira stumbled, her heart racing. She could feel it now, the weight of the ancient magic in the city. The crown was calling to her, pulling her forward. Then, as she reached the central plaza, she saw it. The crown was not what she expected. It was not a crown of gold or jewels, but a dark, twisted artifact, pulsing with shadow and light. It sat atop a stone pedestal, surrounded by faded, ancient runes. The air around it seemed to distort, as if the fabric of reality itself was warping. And in that moment, Alira knew the truth. The crown was not meant to rebuild. It was meant to control. She approached it cautiously, her breath shallow. The figure's warning rang in her ears. This was not a tool for creation. It was a weapon, a force that could tear apart everything. But Alira had come this far. The world needed it. The world needed the power that lay within the crown, or it would be consumed by war, by chaos. Her hand reached out, trembling as she took hold of the artifact. And then, the world exploded into light. The Shattered Crown, Part 2. The moment Alira's fingers brushed the surface of the crown, a surge of energy coursed through her like a bolt of lightning. The light was blinding, filling every corner of her vision. She gasped as the power surged into her, her body feeling as if it was being torn apart and remade at the same time. The air around her seemed to thicken, the weight of ancient magic pressing down on her with such intensity that she felt she might suffocate. The world around her shifted, like a veil being torn open. Time itself felt distorted, the edges of reality warping in and out of focus. Alira's breath was shallow, her heart pounding as she struggled to stay grounded in the chaos. And then, everything stopped. The world snapped back into place, and Alira stood there, trembling, her hand still gripping the crown. But something had changed. She could feel the power, the magic, coursing through her veins, filling her with a terrible, ancient force. It was as if the very essence of Asdaria had been poured into her, and she could feel the echoes of the kingdom's rise and fall reverberating through her mind. A voice, low, ancient, and full of sorrow, spoke in her mind, as if the city itself was speaking through her. "You have chosen poorly, heir of Asdaria. The crown was never meant for one such as you." Alira staggered, her head spinning. She couldn't tell if the voice was real or if it was part of the power she had just unleashed. It felt like both. The weight of the words pressed on her chest, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. She tried to focus, to push through the haze of magic that clouded her senses. She couldn't let it overwhelm her. She had come for the crown. She had come to restore balance to the world. But now, holding the crown in her hand, she realized the truth. It was not a tool for restoration. It was a weapon capable of reshaping the very fabric of reality. And it was calling to her, urging her to wield it. I didn't know," Alira whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know what I was doing." The voice in her mind seemed to answer, a cold laughter echoing in her ears. "None of us know, child. That is the curse of the crown. It binds you, reshapes you, until you are no longer yourself." She felt the energy shift, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. The crown was reacting to her uncertainty, to her hesitation, and she could feel the power within it threatening to take control. It wanted to be used. It wanted to be wielded. And it didn't care who used it. Suddenly, the weight of her choice hit her like a wave. She had come to the city for power, to gain control over the forces that were threatening the world. But now, with the crown in her hands, she realized she might have unleashed something far darker than she could ever control. The city of Asdaria groaned, its broken towers seeming to pulse with the energy of the crown. The air crackled with magic, the ruins stirring as if awakening from a long slumber. Alira took a step back, her breath coming in short gasps as she fought to hold herself together. She couldn't stop the power now. She could feel it inside her, like an infection, spreading through her body and mind. But there was something else, something deeper, the remnants of Asdaria's will, trying to break through, trying to warn her. Suddenly, she wasn't alone. A figure appeared before her, materializing from the shadows, its outline dark and indistinct against the glowing ruins. Alira froze, her hand tightening on the crown as she instinctively raised her sword. The figure moved closer, revealing a tall, cloaked figure, its face hidden beneath a hood. It spoke in a voice that sounded both ancient and weary. "You've done it," the figure said. "You've awakened the crown." Alira's grip on the crown tightened. "Who are you?" The figure stepped closer, its presence filling the space like a shadow that couldn't be shaken. "I am the last of the Watchers," it said, its voice heavy with sorrow. "I was charged with guarding the crown. And now, it is too late." Alira swallowed, her mind reeling. "The last of the Watchers," she repeated. "What do you mean? Who are you really? The figure slowly lifted its hood, revealing a face that had long since been consumed by time. The skin was pale, the eyes sunken and tired. But there was something in those eyes, something that made Elira's heart skip. I am the guardian of Asdaria's true power, the figure said. The last of those who swore an oath to protect the crown from those unworthy to wield it. Elira stepped back. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought the crown could save the world. The guardian's gaze softened, but there was still a heaviness in his eyes. The crown doesn't save. It consumes. And now, you are its heir, whether you like it or not. Elira's breath hitched. She had come to this place seeking power, believing it was the only way to save the world from war and destruction. But now, holding the crown, she felt nothing but dread. This wasn't power. It was a curse. The world won't survive this, she said, her voice trembling. What have I done? The guardian's eyes darkened. What you've done cannot be undone. The crown is a relic of a lost age. Asdaria was not destroyed because it was weak. It was destroyed because it sought power that was never meant to be wielded by mortals. And now, the world will pay the price once more. Elira shook her head, disbelief flooding her mind. But we can still fix it. We can still undo what's been done. The guardian's face hardened. There is no undoing what has been done. The crown is the key to Asdaria's ruin. And you are the key to the world's salvation, or its end. Elira felt the weight of the words press down on her like a physical force. The power of the crown was already beginning to seep into her soul, its magic slowly bending her will, reshaping her thoughts. What do I do? She whispered, her voice filled with desperation. You must make a choice, the guardian said. You must either embrace the power and become what Asdaria was meant to be, a kingdom of destruction and domination, or you must destroy the crown, even at the cost of your own life. The power of the seraphim runs through it. The blood of Asdaria runs through you. Elira's hands trembled as she held the crown, its weight growing heavier with each passing second. She felt the darkness closing in around her, the whispers of the past echoing in her ears. The fate of the world lay in her hands. But could she destroy the very thing that had brought her here? Could she give up the power she had sought for so long? The choice was hers, and the world would never be the same again. The Shattered Crown, Part 3. Elira stood frozen, the crown pulsing in her hand like a beating heart, its power thrumming beneath her skin. The weight of it was suffocating, the raw energy pressing down on her chest. The ruins of Asdaria were eerily quiet now, the air thick with tension, as if even the world itself was waiting for her decision. The guardian watched her silently, his ancient eyes filled with a deep sadness. He had warned her. He had given her the truth. The power of the crown was beyond her control, and to wield it was to invite the end of everything. But as Elira gazed at the twisted artifact, a dark part of her whispered to her, "You can fix everything. You have the power to change the world. You can make it right. You can stop the war, the chaos. The crown can do that." It was tempting, far too tempting. But then another thought cut through the darkness. What if you become the thing you fear? What if the power consumes you like it consumed Asdaria? She looked back at the guardian, who hadn't moved, his face still somber. "You said the crown doesn't save," Elira said, her voice shaky but determined. "Then why did Asdaria ever create it in the first place? Why did they make it if it was only to destroy?" The guardian sighed deeply, his gaze shifting to the shattered city around them, the ruins of what had once been the heart of an empire. The seraphim created the crown in their arrogance, believing they could wield the forces of creation and destruction. They believed they could control the very fabric of reality itself. But no one can control such power, Elira. Not even the gods. And when they tried to use it, Asdaria was torn apart. The crown's power is its curse. It reshapes reality, but it does so at the cost of everything. "But the world is already broken," Elira argued, her grip tightening on the crown. The war is tearing everything apart. The people are suffering. If I can use the crown to stop it. The guardian's expression hardened, his voice cold and sharp. You cannot wield the crown without becoming its servant. It will take your will, your very soul, and turn it into something else. A ruler who does not rule, but commands. A puppet whose strings are pulled by the very power you sought to control. Alira's heart raced, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The weight of the decision threatened to crush her, but there was no time to delay. The world was in peril, and every moment that passed was another step toward its destruction. Is there no other way? She whispered, her voice hoarse. The guardian looked at her, a silent understanding passing between them. There is always another way. The question is whether you are willing to face the consequences of your actions. You have already made a choice simply by touching the crown. Now, you must decide how far you are willing to go. The air around Alira shifted again, growing heavier, as if the very temple were watching her, judging her. The crown hummed in her hands, its power almost suffocating, urging her to use it, to reshape the world in her image. She could feel the temptation crawling under her skin, whispering that it was her destiny, that she was the one meant to fix the world. But the words of the guardian echoed in her mind. The power will consume you. The crown will twist you into something unrecognizable. Alira closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe through the terror that gripped her. She had come here seeking answers, seeking a way to save the world. But now she understood the truth. There were no easy answers. There was no simple solution. The power of the crown was not a gift, it was a curse. With trembling hands, she placed the crown back on the pedestal. The moment it left her grasp, the air in the temple seemed to shift, the oppressive weight of the magic lifting. The shadows that had once loomed over the ruins receded, and for the first time since she had entered Asdaria, the city felt still, silent. The guardian regarded her with a long, hard look, his expression unreadable. You've chosen, Alira. It may be the hardest choice you will ever make. Alira's heart was heavy, but she knew it was the right choice. She had to let the crown go. The power that it offered was too great, too dangerous. The world didn't need another ruler who could bend reality to their will. It needed someone who could guide it, help it heal, without forcing it into submission. The crown was not hers to wield. The world doesn't need to be reshaped, Alira said softly, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. It needs to be healed. The people need to come together, to fight for their future, not have it forced upon them. The guardian nodded, a faint trace of approval in his eyes. You've chosen wisely. The crown can only destroy. You, Alira, have chosen creation. And that is what the world needs now. Alira turned her back on the crown, walking away from the pedestal. The guardian stood motionless, watching her leave the temple. As she walked through the ruined streets of Asdaria, the city that had once been the cradle of an empire, she felt something stirring in the air, a shift. The magic that had once consumed the city seemed to quiet, its presence now only a faint echo in the background of her mind. The world still hung in the balance, but Alira knew that she had made the right choice. The crown had not chosen her, but that was not a failure. It was freedom. Freedom from the power that could so easily consume her. Freedom to help the world rebuild, to restore balance in a way that would not tear it apart. She stepped out of the ruins of Asdaria, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The road ahead would not be easy. The war was still raging, and the world still lay on the edge of destruction. But now, she had something more than power. She had purpose, and that was something the crown could never give her. Title: The Emberfall. The forest of Velder had always been a place of quiet wonder, a haven for those who sought peace in its ancient groves and winding paths. Towering trees with thick, gnarled roots sprawled across the earth like the fingers of forgotten gods, and their leaves, evergreen and vibrant, whispered with the secrets of ages past. It was a place of magic, ancient, quiet, and, until recently, untouchable by the outside world. But something had changed. The air was thick with a strange, unsettling energy that buzzed in the air like the hum of a distant storm. It was faint at first, almost unnoticeable, but now it was undeniable. The ground trembled underfoot, and the once clear skies had taken on a dull, ashen hue, the light flickering strangely as if the sun itself was losing its strength. A man walked through the forest, his steps slow and deliberate, as if the forest itself was trying to reject him. His name was Eric, and he was a stranger to these woods. His dark cloak fluttered behind him as he moved, his face shadowed by the hood pulled low over his brow. His hand rested on the hilt of a worn dagger, the faint gleam of steel reflecting in the dim light. His boots crunched against the dry leaves and moss-covered ground as he walked deeper into the heart of the forest. He had come here for a reason. Velder had once been home to the Druids, an order of ancient mages who could control the forces of nature. But those Druids had vanished long ago, leaving only whispers of their existence. Eric, however, had learned something in the dark corners of forgotten libraries, in the cryptic prophecies of the old world. There was power hidden in these woods, and Eric needed it. He had heard the stories, the ones of the Emberfall. It was said that, in the deepest part of the forest, there was a place where the trees burned with a strange fire, where the ground glowed with the embers of an ancient, untamed magic. The Emberfall, they called it, and it was a place of immense power. But no one had seen it in centuries. The Druids had sealed it away, hidden it from those who would seek to exploit its magic. But Eric wasn't just seeking the power of the Emberfall. He was searching for something more, something that could stop the impending war that threatened to tear the world apart. A faint whisper in the back of his mind called to him, urging him forward. The pull of the forest was strong now, its energy wrapping around him like a cloak, urging him deeper, further into its heart. Finally, he reached the clearing. The trees opened up before him, and there, at the center of the clearing, was the Emberfall. It was more magnificent than he could have imagined. The ground was covered in a soft, glowing fire, the flames flickering in shades of gold, red, and orange, as if the very earth itself was alive with heat. The trees surrounding the clearing were not the towering giants of the rest of the forest. These were ancient oaks, their trunks twisted and blackened by centuries of fire, but their leaves shimmered with a vibrant, living flame that seemed to dance in the wind. At the center of the clearing was a stone pedestal, atop which lay a glowing crystal, the Emberstone. It was the source of the fire that burned in the forest, the heart of the Emberfall, and it was the power Eric had come to claim. He approached the pedestal cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the heat radiating from the Emberstone, and the air around him shimmered with its energy. He reached out with trembling hands, but just as his fingers brushed the surface of the stone, a voice, low and ancient, echoed through the clearing. "You dare seek the Emberstone?" Eric froze, his heart skipping a beat. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the very air itself. The flames around him flickered, and for a moment, he thought he saw something move in the corner of his eye. Something shadowed, something ancient. "You are not the first to come," the voice continued, growing louder. "Many have sought the power of the Emberstone, but none have been worthy. What makes you different, Eric of the Lost Kingdom?" Eric's pulse quickened, but he stood firm. "I am not here to take the power for myself," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the ancient presence surrounding him. "I seek to save the world. The Emberstone holds the key to ending the war that is coming. I need its power." The voice was silent for a long moment, and Eric felt a strange pressure in the air, as if the very world around him was weighing him down. "The power you seek is not without cost," the voice said at last, its tone dark and warning. "The Emberstone can save the world, but it can also destroy it. The balance of fire and earth is fragile. The war you speak of is not the first to be sparked by this power. If you wield it, you will face the consequences. Are you prepared for that?" Eric's heart raced, but he nodded, his resolve hardening. "I am. The world will burn if I do nothing. I will risk the consequences to stop the destruction." The voice seemed to laugh softly, the sound like the crackling of a distant fire. "Then take it, Eric of the Lost Kingdom. But know this, when you take the Emberstone, you take its curse with it. You will be bound to it, and the flames will never leave you. Eric reached out, his fingers closing around the ember stone. The moment he touched it, a surge of heat exploded through him, and the world around him seemed to shudder and shift. The flames that had once burned in the ground now surged up into the sky, their heat scorching the air. The power of the ember stone flooded through Eric like a tidal wave, filling every part of him with its raw, untamed energy. He felt it course through his veins, igniting every cell in his body. But as the power surged, so did the pain. It was as though his very soul was being ripped apart and reforged in the fire's furnace. And then, just as quickly, it stopped. Eric stood in the clearing, breathing heavily, his hands still gripping the ember stone. The world around him was silent once more, the flames dying down to a soft glow. But he could feel it. He could feel the power inside him, the weight of the ember stone binding itself to him, wrapping itself around his very essence. "You have chosen," the voice said, no longer a whisper but a command. "Now you must live with the consequences." Eric looked at the glowing crystal in his hands, the weight of it heavy with the knowledge that his fate, and the fate of the world, was now intertwined with its power. Title: The Emberfall. The forest of Velder had always been a place of quiet wonder, a haven for those who sought peace in its ancient groves and winding paths. Towering trees with thick, gnarled roots sprawled across the earth like the fingers of forgotten gods, and their leaves, evergreen and vibrant, whispered with the secrets of ages past. It was a place of magic, ancient, quiet, and, until recently, untouchable by the outside world. But something had changed. The air was thick with a strange, unsettling energy that buzzed in the air like the hum of a distant storm. It was faint at first, almost unnoticeable, but now it was undeniable. The ground trembled underfoot, and the once clear skies had taken on a dull, ashen hue, the light flickering strangely as if the sun itself was losing its strength. A man walked through the forest, his steps slow and deliberate, as if the forest itself was trying to reject him. His name was Eric, and he was a stranger to these woods. His dark cloak fluttered behind him as he moved, his face shadowed by the hood pulled low over his brow. His hand rested on the hilt of a worn dagger, the faint gleam of steel reflecting in the dim light. His boots crunched against the dry leaves and moss-covered ground as he walked deeper into the heart of the forest. He had come here for a reason. Velder had once been home to the Druids, an order of ancient mages who could control the forces of nature. But those Druids had vanished long ago, leaving only whispers of their existence. Eric, however, had learned something in the dark corners of forgotten libraries, in the cryptic prophecies of the old world. There was power hidden in these woods, and Eric needed it. He had heard the stories, the ones of the Emberfall. It was said that, in the deepest part of the forest, there was a place where the trees burned with a strange fire, where the ground glowed with the embers of an ancient, untamed magic. The Emberfall, they called it, and it was a place of immense power. But no one had seen it in centuries. The Druids had sealed it away, hidden it from those who would seek to exploit its magic. But Eric wasn't just seeking the power of the Emberfall. He was searching for something more, something that could stop the impending war that threatened to tear the world apart. A faint whisper in the back of his mind called to him, urging him forward. The pull of the forest was strong now, its energy wrapping around him like a cloak, urging him deeper, further into its heart. Finally, he reached the clearing. The trees opened up before him, and there, at the center of the clearing, was the Emberfall. It was more magnificent than he could have imagined. The ground was covered in a soft, glowing fire, the flames flickering in shades of gold, red, and orange, as if the very earth itself was alive with heat. The trees surrounding the clearing were not the towering giants of the rest of the forest. These were ancient oaks, their trunks twisted and blackened by centuries of fire, but their leaves shimmered with a vibrant, living flame that seemed to dance in the wind. At the center of the clearing was a stone pedestal, atop which lay a glowing crystal, the Emberstone. It was the source of the fire that burned in the forest, the heart of the Emberfall, and it was the power Eric had come to claim. He approached the pedestal cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the heat radiating from the Emberstone, and the air around him shimmered with its energy. He reached out with trembling hands, but just as his fingers brushed the surface of the stone, a voice, low and ancient, echoed through the clearing. "You dare seek the ember's tone?" Eric froze, his heart skipping a beat. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the very air itself. The flames around him flickered, and for a moment, he thought he saw something move in the corner of his eye. Something shadowed, something ancient. "You are not the first to come," the voice continued, growing louder. "Many have sought the power of the ember's tone, but none have been worthy. What makes you different, Eric of the Lost Kingdom?" Eric's pulse quickened, but he stood firm. "I am not here to take the power for myself," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the ancient presence surrounding him. "I seek to save the world. The ember's tone holds the key to ending the war that is coming. I need its power." The voice was silent for a long moment, and Eric felt a strange pressure in the air, as if the very world around him was weighing him down. "The power you seek is not without cost," the voice said at last, its tone dark and warning. "The ember's tone can save the world, but it can also destroy it. The balance of fire and earth is fragile. The war you speak of is not the first to be sparked by this power. If you wield it, you will face the consequences. Are you prepared for that?" Eric's heart raced, but he nodded, his resolve hardening. "I am. The world will burn if I do nothing. I will risk the consequences to stop the destruction." The voice seemed to laugh softly, the sound like the crackling of a distant fire. "Then take it, Eric of the Lost Kingdom. But know this, when you take the ember's tone, you take its curse with it. You will be bound to it, and the flames will never leave you." Eric reached out, his fingers closing around the ember's tone. The moment he touched it, a surge of heat exploded through him, and the world around him seemed to shudder and shift. The flames that had once burned in the ground now surged up into the sky, their heat scorching the air. The power of the ember's tone flooded through Eric like a tidal wave, filling every part of him with its raw, untamed energy. He felt it course through his veins, igniting every cell in his body. But as the power surged, so did the pain. It was as though his very soul was being ripped apart and reforged in the fire's furnace. And then, just as quickly, it stopped. Eric stood in the clearing, breathing heavily, his hands still gripping the ember's tone. The world around him was silent once more, the flames dying down to a soft glow. But he could feel it, he could feel the power inside him, the weight of the ember's tone binding itself to him, wrapping itself around his very essence. "You have chosen," the voice said, no longer a whisper but a command. "Now you must live with the consequences." Eric looked at the glowing crystal in his hands, the weight of it heavy with the knowledge that his fate, and the fate of the world, was now intertwined with its power. The Shattered Crown, Part 4. The world around Eric was different now. The forest, once a place of eerie quiet and unsettling whispers, now felt alive with the pulse of the Emberstone's power. Every step he took seemed to resonate with a force that flowed through him, his body thrumming with energy as though he had become a conduit for the very flames that had once destroyed Asdaria. He could feel the heat deep inside him, beneath his skin, and he was no longer sure where his own will ended and the Emberstone's began. The power was vast, unfathomable, and as it settled into him, it felt like it would consume him from within. Every heartbeat, every breath, seemed to fan the flames of its power. He clenched his jaw, trying to suppress the overwhelming urge to give in, to let the fire burn as brightly as it could. But something inside him still resisted. This was not the power he had imagined. This was not the tool he could use to save the world. It was something else entirely, a force of destruction, capable of reshaping everything in its path. But he had already made his choice. The Ember's Tone had chosen him, and now he had to wield it. The forest around him seemed to bend and twist as the magic continued to surge through him, his body fighting to stay grounded in reality. He stumbled forward, feeling the weight of the stone pulling him, urging him toward a destination he could not yet see. There, in the distance, the trees began to thin. The forest opened into a wide, open plain, and at its center stood a ruined tower, an ancient structure, its crumbling walls covered in moss and vines, its spires long since broken. The tower had been abandoned for centuries, but Eric knew what it was. It had been the seat of power for the druids who had once protected the Emberstone, the last bastion against those who would seek to misuse its power. But it was more than that now. It was a place of reckoning. A place where Eric would have to face the truth of what he had done. As he approached the tower, the ground beneath him began to shake. The Emberstone pulsed violently, as if it were reacting to something hidden deep within the tower. The air around him crackled with energy, and the temperature rose sharply. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. A low, guttural voice echoed through the air, ancient and heavy with the weight of time. "You have come, child of fire." Eric froze, his heart racing. The voice wasn't coming from the tower. It was coming from within him, as though the Emberstone itself was speaking. "You seek to wield what was never meant for mortal hands," the voice continued. "You seek to bring order to a world already on the brink of destruction. But do you understand the cost of that power? Do you understand what it demands?" "I understand more than you think," Eric replied, his voice rough but steady. He raised his head, his eyes fixed on the tower ahead. "I understand that if I do nothing, the world will burn anyway. I came here to stop it, to use this power to prevent that." The voice seemed to laugh, a low rumbling sound that filled the air. "Foolish child. You think you can control the fire? You think you can shape it into a force for good?" Eric's grip tightened on the Emberstone, his pulse quickening. The heat inside him was becoming unbearable, the power threatening to consume him. But he stood firm. "I have no other choice," he said, his voice strained. "I've already made my decision." A dark silence followed, and then the voice spoke again, this time with a tone of finality. "Then you shall see the price of your choice." Before Eric could react, the ground beneath his feet cracked open, and the tower ahead seemed to shudder with the weight of a terrible force. From the cracks in the earth, tendrils of flame shot up, their heat searing the air. The fire rose higher, twisting and writhing like a living thing, until it formed a massive figure, an embodiment of the flames, dark and terrifying, its molten eyes fixed on Eric. "You have taken the Emberstone," the figure said, its voice a twisted echo of the one that had spoken to him before. "But now, you must prove yourself worthy." The fire creature's body seemed to flow and shift, its form a mixture of flame and shadow. Eric could feel the heat radiating from it, and he could hear the power of the Emberstone within him resonating with the creature's energy. It was a test, a trial, one that he would have to pass, or else the consequences would be far worse than he could imagine. The figure's molten eyes glowed brighter as it spoke again. "Prove your strength. Show me that you can control the power you sought to wield." Without warning, the figure lunged at him, its form bursting into a torrent of flame. Eric barely had time to react as he raised his sword, the blade glowing with the same fiery energy that surged through his veins. The clash was deafening, the air around them filled with the sound of crackling flames and roaring heat. Eric fought with all his might, his body moving almost on instinct as he swung his sword at the creature. But the fire was too fast. It twisted around his strikes, reforming with every blow. The Emberstone pulsed within him, feeding the fire, feeding the creature. He could feel the struggle within himself, the fight between the power of the Emberstone and his own will. The fire wanted to consume him. It wanted to take control. "You cannot win this battle, Eric," the figure taunted, its voice laced with mockery. "The Emberstone is not meant for you. It is not meant for any mortal to wield. It will break you." Eric gritted his teeth, his sword held firm as he fought against the overwhelming force of the fire. He could feel the power surging within him, could feel it twisting, bending him, urging him to give in, to let the flames consume him. But deep within, there was a flicker of resistance, a spark of his own will. "I can control it," he thought, his breath ragged. "I have to control it." With a cry, Eric channeled every ounce of strength he had, focusing on the ember stone. He could feel the fire in him, the energy of the stone, and for the first time, he realized that he didn't have to fight it. He could guide it. He could shape it. The sword in his hand flared with blinding light, and with a final, mighty strike, he cleaved through the fire creature's form. The creature screamed in fury as it dissipated into the air, its flames flickering and dying, leaving only a trail of smoke behind. Eric stood panting, his body trembling with exhaustion. The Emberstone's power surged through him, but now it was no longer overwhelming. It was a part of him, a fire he could control, not one that controlled him. The world around him shifted again, the air clearing, the fires dissipating. The voice that had spoken to him earlier echoed once more, softer this time. You have proven yourself worthy, Eric. But remember this, the fire is never truly tamed. It is a part of you now, and you will carry its weight. Eric's hands shook as he lowered his sword, the Emberstone still glowing faintly in his grasp. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. He turned toward the ruined tower, now silent and still. The Emberstone had granted him power, but it had also changed him. The path ahead would not be easy. There were still those who would seek to use its power, and Eric would need to decide how to wield it. Would he use it to save the world? Or would the world be consumed by the flames he now commanded? The future was uncertain, and the weight of his choices pressed down on him. But one thing was clear, the world H. The Shattered Crown, Part 4. The world around Eric was different now. The forest, once a place of eerie quiet and unsettling whispers, now felt alive with the pulse of the Emberstone's power. Every step he took seemed to resonate with a force that flowed through him, his body thrumming with energy, as though he had become a conduit for the very flames that had once destroyed Asdaria. He could feel the heat deep inside him, beneath his skin, and he was no longer sure where his own will ended and the Emberstone's began. The power was vast, unfathomable, and as it settled into him, it felt like it would consume him from within. Every heartbeat, every breath, seemed to fan the flames of its power. He clenched his jaw, trying to suppress the overwhelming urge to give in, to let the fire burn as brightly as it could. But something inside him still resisted. This was not the power he had imagined. This was not the tool he could use to save the world. It was something else entirely, a force of destruction, capable of reshaping everything in its path. But he had already made his choice. The Emberstone had chosen him, and now he had to wield it. The forest around him seemed to bend and twist as the magic continued to surge through him, his body fighting to stay grounded in reality. He stumbled forward, feeling the weight of the stone pulling him, urging him toward a destination he could not yet see. There, in the distance, the trees began to thin. The forest opened into a wide, open plain, and at its center stood a ruined tower, an ancient structure, its crumbling walls covered in moss and vines, its spires long since broken. The tower had been abandoned for centuries, but Eric knew what it was. It had been the seat of power for the Druids who had once protected the Emberstone, the last bastion against those who would seek to misuse its power. But it was more than that now. It was a place of reckoning. A place where Eric would have to face the truth of what he had done. As he approached the tower, the ground beneath him began to shake. The Emberstone pulsed violently, as if it were reacting to something hidden deep within the tower. The air around him crackled with energy, and the temperature rose sharply. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. A low, guttural voice echoed through the air, ancient and heavy with the weight of time. You have come, child of fire. Eric froze, his heart racing. The voice wasn't coming from the tower. It was coming from within him, as though the Emberstone itself was speaking. You seek to wield what was never meant for mortal hands, the voice continued. You seek to bring order to a world already on the brink of destruction. But do you understand the cost of that power? Do you understand what it demands? I understand more than you think, Eric replied, his voice rough but steady. He raised his head, his eyes fixed on the tower ahead. I understand that if I do nothing, the world will burn anyway. I came here to stop it, to use this power to prevent that. The voice seemed to laugh, a low rumbling sound that filled the air. Foolish child. You think you can control the fire? You think you can shape it into a force for good? Eric's grip tightened on the ember's tone, his pulse quickening. The heat inside him was becoming unbearable, the power threatening to consume him. But he stood firm. I have no other choice, he said, his voice strained. I've already made my decision. A dark silence followed, and then the voice spoke again, this time with a tone of finality. Then you shall see the price of your choice. Before Eric could react, the ground beneath his feet cracked open, and the tower ahead seemed to shudder with the weight of a terrible force. From the cracks in the earth, tendrils of flame shot up, their heat searing the air. The fire rose higher, twisting and writhing like a living thing, until it formed a massive figure, an embodiment of the flames, dark and terrifying, its molten eyes fixed on Eric. You have taken the ember's tone, the figure said, its voice a twisted echo of the one that had spoken to him before. But now, you must prove yourself worthy. The fire creature's body seemed to flow and shift, its form a mixture of flame and shadow. Eric could feel the heat radiating from it, and he could hear the power of the ember's tone within him resonating with the creature's energy. It was a test, a trial, one that he would have to pass, or else the consequences would be far worse than he could imagine. The figure's molten eyes glowed brighter as it spoke again. Prove your strength. Show me that you can control the power you sought to wield. Without warning, the figure lunged at him, its form bursting into a torrent of flame. Eric barely had time to react as he raised his sword, the blade glowing with the same fiery energy that surged through his veins. The clash was deafening, the air around them filled with the sound of crackling flames and roaring heat. Eric fought with all his might, his body moving almost on instinct as he swung his sword at the creature. But the fire was too fast. It twisted around his strikes, reforming with every blow. The ember's tone pulsed within him, feeding the fire, feeding the creature. He could feel the struggle within himself, the fight between the power of the ember's tone and his own will. The fire wanted to consume him. It wanted to take control. You cannot win this battle, Eric, the figure taunted, its voice laced with mockery. The ember's tone is not meant for you. It is not meant for any mortal to wield. It will break you. Eric gritted his teeth, his sword held firm as he fought against the overwhelming force of the fire. He could feel the power surging within him, could feel it twisting, bending him, urging him to give in, to let the flames consume him. But deep within, there was a flicker of resistance, a spark of his own will. I can control it, he thought, his breath ragged. I have to control it. With a cry, Eric channeled every ounce of strength he had, focusing on the ember's tone. He could feel the fire in him, the energy of the stone, and for the first time, he realized that he didn't have to fight it. He could guide it. He could shape it. The sword in his hand flared with blinding light, and with a final, mighty strike, he cleaved through the fire creature's form. The creature screamed in fury as it dissipated into the air, its flames flickering and dying, leaving only a trail of smoke behind. Eric stood panting, his body trembling with exhaustion. The Emberstone's power surged through him, but now it was no longer overwhelming. It was a part of him, a fire he could control, not one that controlled him. The world around him shifted again, the air clearing, the fires dissipating. The voice that had spoken to him earlier echoed once more, softer this time. You have proven yourself worthy, Eric. But remember this, the fire is never truly tamed. It is a part of you now, and you will carry its weight. Eric's hands shook as he lowered his sword, the ember's tone still glowing faintly in his grasp. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. He turned toward the ruined tower, now silent and still. The ember's tone had granted him power, but it had also changed him. The path ahead would not be easy. There were still those who would seek to use its power, and Eric would need to decide how to wield it. Would he use it to save the world? Or would the world be consumed by the flames he now commanded? The future was uncertain, and the weight of his choices. The shattered crown, Part 6. The air was thick with tension as Eric stood at the edge of the clearing, Lyra's words still echoing in his mind. The ember's tone pulsed in his hand, its power like an unquenchable fire that he could feel deep within his very soul. It had chosen him, and he had embraced it. But now, standing in the ruins of the ancient tower, he wondered if he had made the right choice. The weight of the world seemed to press down on him with each passing second. Eric. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood a few steps behind him, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon, where the forest met the sky. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze, something that seemed to reflect a deep worry. She had always been a fierce protector, but now she seemed almost resigned. "I've come to warn you," she said softly, her voice laced with regret. "I don't know if you truly understand what you've done." Eric turned to face her, his eyes hard with resolve. "I understand more than you think. The world is on the brink of destruction. The Ember's tone is the only way to stop it." "You're right," Lyra agreed, but her voice was heavy with doubt. "The world is teetering on the edge. But the Ember's tone, it's not just a weapon. It's a force of nature. It can't be controlled forever, Eric. It will break you." "I will not be broken," Eric replied, his voice firm, though the weight of her words lingered in the back of his mind. He had to believe in his ability to control the power. He had no choice but to. Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, and she stepped closer. "The war you seek to end, it's only just begun. And those who would seek to take the Ember's tone for themselves will come for you. They will stop at nothing." Eric nodded, his grip tightening on the Ember's tone. "I'm ready for them." Lyra hesitated. "You think you are. But the Ember's tone is a beacon for those who crave power. There are forces in this world that even the Ember's tone cannot fight." Eric's mind raced. He had been prepared to face enemies. He had known that the world would come after the power he now wielded. But he hadn't thought of this. He hadn't considered the true nature of the enemies he would face. "Who?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. "Who will come for me?" Lyra met his gaze, her eyes dark with sorrow. "The one who rules the northern lands. A warlord by the name of Korak, who seeks the power of the Ember's tone to bring the world to its knees. And there are others, factions, mages, and kings who will all seek to control it. They will come for you, Eric. And they will do everything in their power to take what you have." Eric clenched his jaw, his resolve hardening. "Let them come. I will protect the Ember's tone. And if they want it, they'll have to take it from me." Lyra shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. The Ember's tone will not be so easily controlled. And those who seek it will not stop at anything. They will burn the world down to get it." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. The Ember's tone was a weapon. A power that could reshape the world, yes. But it was also a danger. He had known this, but hearing it from Lyra, hearing the truth in her voice, made it all the more real. "I've already made my choice," Eric said, his voice steady, though doubt lingered in the back of his mind. "The power of the Ember's tone is mine. I will not let it fall into the wrong hands." Lyra took a step back, her expression unreadable. "Then you are ready for war." Eric turned toward the horizon, where the dark clouds of an impending storm gathered. He could feel the storm in the air, both the literal one above and the one brewing in the world below. The Emberstone's power was his now, and the world would come for it. He had chosen the path of power. But with power came the responsibility to protect it, and to protect the world from those who would misuse it. And so, with a heavy heart, Eric took his first step forward, the weight of the Ember's tone burning in his chest. His journey was just beginning, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. The world was about to change, and he would have to decide how far he was willing to go to save it. Days later, the journey toward the northern lands took Eric and Lyra across vast stretches of barren plains, through dense forests, and over treacherous mountains. The air grew colder as they neared the borders of Korak's territory, and the weight of the impending conflict settled heavily on Eric's shoulders. They had traveled in silence for much of the journey, each lost in their thoughts. Lyra had remained a steady presence beside him, but Eric could tell she was troubled. The warning about Korak had not been taken lightly. "Do you think Korak will come for us?" Eric asked one evening as they camped beneath the canopy of a thick forest. The fire crackled between them, its warmth a small comfort against the growing cold. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She sat across from him, her eyes fixed on the flames, lost in thought. "Korak is a man driven by power," she said finally. "He is ruthless. He believes in the might of strength, and he will stop at nothing to control the Emberstone." Eric's grip tightened on his sword hilt. "Then he will face me." Lyra looked at him then, her gaze sharp. "It's not just him. There are others who will come for the Emberstone, too. And some of them are more dangerous than Korak." Eric stared into the fire, his mind racing with the weight of her words. He had known the Emberstone was powerful, but he hadn't fully grasped how much it would cost. The war for it had already begun. He stood up abruptly, pacing away from the fire. "I can't turn back now. The Emberstone is mine, and I will protect it. I will do whatever it takes." Lyra watched him, her expression unreadable. "Remember, Eric, that the price of wielding the Emberstone is not just what you lose, but what the world loses. Every choice you make will have consequences. Every battle you fight will change you." Eric stopped and turned back to her, his jaw clenched. "I'm not afraid of the cost. The world is already broken. If the Emberstone can fix it, I'll pay whatever price is necessary." Lyra's voice softened, her gaze filled with both caution and sympathy. "Just don't lose yourself in the fire, Eric. Don't let the power burn you alive." Eric didn't reply. He didn't need to. The path was set before him, and he would follow it, no matter where it led. The Shattered Crown, Part 7. The northern lands were cold. The air was bitter, filled with the scent of snow and the chill of the mountains that loomed like silent giants against the skyline. Eric could feel the temperature drop as they crossed the border into Korak's territory. The Emberstone pulsed faintly beneath his cloak, a constant reminder of the power he now wielded, and the war that awaited him. Lyra remained by his side, her demeanor as calm and composed as ever. But Eric could sense the tension in her, the wariness in her every movement. She had been his companion for years, but this was different. Korak wasn't just another enemy. He was a warlord who had united the fractured northern clans, a man known for his ruthlessness and cunning. He had a reputation for taking what he wanted, no matter the cost. And now, he wanted the Emberstone. They moved through the snow-covered terrain, the silence of the landscape pressing in on them, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps in the deep snow. The cold wind howled around them, biting at their faces and hands, but Eric barely noticed. His mind was focused on the task at hand. The journey had taken them days, and with each passing moment, he could feel Korak's presence growing closer. The warlord was a force that Eric could not ignore. If Korak had learned of the Emberstone's power, he would stop at nothing to take it. The campfire crackled as they settled down for the night. The stars above were hidden behind thick clouds, and the world felt impossibly vast, a sea of white stretching out in every direction. Eric stared into the fire, his thoughts a maelstrom of doubt and determination. "How do we know he's coming for us?" Eric asked, breaking the silence. "How do we know he's even aware of the Emberstone?" Lyra was sharpening her blade, the rhythmic sound of metal against stone punctuating the stillness. She didn't look up at him as she spoke, but her voice was steady. "Korak has spies. He controls most of the northern clans now, and rumors travel fast. The Emberstone, it's not just a weapon. It's a symbol of power, and he knows what it can do. He won't rest until it's in his hands." Eric nodded slowly, his mind grappling with the weight of her words. He had known that the Emberstone would attract attention, but he hadn't truly understood how much danger it would bring. Korak was only the beginning. There would be others, and they would not hesitate to fight for the power that Eric now held. Lyra finished with her sword and looked up at him. The closer we get to Korik's stronghold, the more dangerous it will become. We can't underestimate him. He's not just a brute. He's a strategist. Eric stood up, walking a few steps away from the campfire. He looked out into the night, his breath clouding in the freezing air. I'm not underestimating him, but I can't back down. If he wants the Emberstone, he'll have to take it from me. Lyra's voice softened. And if you fail, if the Emberstone consumes you, or worse, you're forced to use it to stop him. Eric turned to face her, his jaw tight. I don't have a choice. The world will fall into chaos if I do nothing. Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and approached him, her expression somber. I know, but I've seen what this kind of power can do to people. I've seen what it did to Asdaria. You've chosen the path of the Emberstone, and that means accepting what comes with it. The world needs someone to stop the war, Eric. But don't let that someone be someone else. Don't let it be the Emberstone. The weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. He knew what she meant. The Emberstone was a power unlike anything he had ever known, and the more he wielded it, the harder it would become to control. He had already felt the pull, the temptation to use it recklessly, to reshape the world in his own image. But that was the last thing he wanted. He wasn't here to dominate the world. He was here to save it. The fire crackled in the silence between them, but Eric's resolve hardened. He would face Korik, and whatever else came after him. The Emberstone had chosen him, but he would choose how to wield it. The next day, the landscape had changed as they neared Korik's stronghold. The once peaceful snowfields now felt hostile, as though the land itself had turned against them. The wind howled, driving snow across the path ahead, making it difficult to see. But Eric and Lyra pressed on, knowing that Korik's fortress lay ahead, and with it, the greatest battle of their lives. The stronghold was perched atop a rocky hill, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. Massive stone walls surrounded it, and the air was thick with tension. Eric could sense that the warlord was aware of their presence. The air around them crackled with anticipation, and every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. As they neared the gates of the stronghold, the ground began to rumble beneath them. The gates, massive and intimidating, slowly began to open, revealing an army of soldiers standing at attention, their armor gleaming even in the dim light. Korik stood at the center of them, a towering figure, his broad shoulders and menacing presence sending a ripple of unease through Eric's chest. He was everything Lyra had warned him about, a warrior of unparalleled strength, a leader who had united the northern tribes under his banner. His eyes locked onto Eric with a predatory gleam. Well, well, Korik's voice boomed, carrying across the battlefield. I've been expecting you, Eric. You've come for the Emberstone, I presume. Eric didn't answer immediately. He stood tall, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, the Emberstone pulsing at his side. I didn't come for a fight, Korik. But if you want the Emberstone, you'll have to take it from me. Korik's laugh echoed through the stronghold, a sound that sent a chill down Eric's spine. Oh, I intend to. You've made a grave mistake, boy. You think you can control such power? The Emberstone belongs to me. Before Eric could react, Korik raised his hand, and his soldiers began to move. The ground rumbled as the warlord summoned his forces, each one moving with precise coordination. It was a strategy, a challenge, one that would force Eric to fight, to use the power of the Emberstone. Eric's heart pounded in his chest, the Emberstone's power surging in response to the threat. His grip tightened on his sword, and he could feel the fire of the stone burning within him. It was time. Then come and take it, Eric said, his voice low and filled with resolve. The battle had begun.